The day had begun like any other, sluggish and uneventful, as students shuffled from one class to the next, half asleep and wishing for the final bell. The sky outside was overcast, thick with clouds that pressed low against the school building, casting an eerie gray light through the windows. The hum of fluorescent bulbs filled the quiet, blending with the low murmur of classroom chatter. Then, suddenly, the intercom crackled to life. It wasn't the usual cheerful voice of the principal or the secretary. Instead, it was cold, mechanical, almost emotionless. All staff and students initiate lockdown. This is not a drill. Just like that, everything shifted. Desks scraped against floors. Teachers rushed to the doors, turning locks with trembling hands. Lights snapped off, lines drawn. In the suffocating dark, the air grew thick with confusion and unspoken fear. Eyes darted across the room, seeking reassurance that no one could give. Whispers started, questions without answers. Who made the announcement? Why wasn't there an alarm? There was no sound of running in the halls, no screaming, no indication of any real threat. Just that voice so flat, so devoid of urgency it felt off, wrong somehow. Most students huddled in the corners, away from windows and doors, trying to stay silent even as their minds raced. Some clutched their phones, desperately refreshing screens that wouldn't load. No signal, no updates, no contact with the outside world. Minutes dragged like hours. The school building, usually filled with the noise of movement, felt dead. But beneath the silence was something else, a tension that didn't feel like normal. Fear. It felt watched, almost as if the building itself was holding its breath. And then came the moment everyone would remember, the first soft scratching sound from inside the room. Silence in the classroom was thick enough to choke on, broken only by the shallow breaths of students crouched under desks or pressed against the wall. Then, just beneath the hum of the overhead lights, something else began to creep into the edge of their awareness. A faint, irregular noise, so quiet at first that many thought it was just their imagination, but it persisted. A scratching sound. Soft, deliberate. It came from the far side of the room, near the old metal heater vent beneath the windows. Heads slowly turned in unison, eyes wide with confusion and fear. The teacher, who had been holding a finger to her lips, lowered her hand as her eyes fixed on the vent. The scratching grew louder, more insistent. It wasn't the skitter of a mouse or the creak of old pipes. It was rhythmic like long fingernails dragging along metal. Someone whispered, "Do you hear that?" And someone else shushed them immediately, the panic beginning to ripple through the room. The vent, a fixture everyone had ignored for years, had suddenly become the focal point of their terror. Something was behind it or inside it. The scratching would stop for several seconds, then start again, this time from a different part of the wall. It was moving. Whatever it wasn't staying in one place. Every time it paused, there was a dreadful anticipation, like waiting for thunder after lightning. Then came the tapping. Not scratching anymore, but tapping 3 slow, deliberate taps against the inside of the wall. It sounded almost intentional, like a code or a signal. The kind of sound a person makes when trying to get someone's attention. But no one in the room moved. No one dared speak. Because whatever was on, the other side wasn't trying to get out. It was already in the room, had gone completely still. Each student frozen in place, listening to the slow tapping that echoed through the walls. Then, with a sound so soft it barely registered, the door handle began to move. It started as a faint creak, the metallic kind that makes the hairs on your arms rise. Every eye turned toward the classroom door. No one had approached it. The teacher hadn't moved. The hallway outside had been dead silent for what felt like an eternity. Yet the handle turned, slowly and deliberately, as though someone on the other side was testing the lock gently, carefully, patiently. It wasn't the frantic jiggling of someone in a panic or the aggressive force of someone trying to break in. It was calculated, curious. The sound cut through the darkness like a knife, and several students instinctively shrank farther into the shadows beneath their desks. The teacher motioned for everyone to stay silent, her face pale and eyes locked on the door. The handle turned again. This time it paused at the top of the arc, holding for a few seconds, then releasing with a soft clunk back into place. Everyone waited. Nothing happened. Just silence again, more unbearable than the sounds themselves. Then it began again, the handle turning slowly, rising and falling. No knocking. No footsteps, no voice asking to be let in. Just that same motion, as if someone or something was rehearsing the act of opening the door. Some students began to quietly cry, stifling sobs in their sleeves, unable to understand why the emergency lights hadn't activated or why no one had come to check on them. The security cameras, phones, intercom, none of them seemed to work. Now, but the door handle continued to move, almost with a kind of rhythm, a pulse that didn't match anything human. The door, which had been locked from the inside by the teacher moments after the lockdown announcement, creaked open by itself. Not with force, not kicked in. Just a soft, measured groan, as if someone or something on the other side had simply turned the knob and pushed gently. It opened no more than an inch, but that was enough. Enough to see the shadow that spilled across the floor. It wasn't the shape of a person. It was too tall, too distorted, with edges that rippled unnaturally light. It didn't belong to the physical world. The shape stretched from the hallway into the classroom, spilling out like black smoke, but it held a form broad shoulders slouched at an angle, arms that reached too far down, one leg slightly bent as if broken. It didn't move, but it seemed aware of the eyes locked onto it from the far corner of the room. No sound came from the hallway, no footsteps, no breathing. No indication that anything alive was standing there. Just that stretching shadow, too quiet, too still. One of the students whimpered and was quickly silenced by another. No one dared move. Even blinking felt risky. The teacher, barely breathing, stared at the door with wide, unblinking eyes, one hand outstretched as if she could shield the class from what was there. Then the lights in the hallway behind the figure began to flicker, casting stuttering flashes of pale yellow through the crack in the door. With each flicker, the shape seemed to twitch one moment further into the room, the next moment gone, then back again. The classroom remained motionless, gripped by invisible fingers of dread. The door didn't open any farther. It didn't need to. That sliver of darkness was enough to paralyze everyone inside with a fear that went beyond anything logical when the police finally arrived. Over an hour after the initial lockdown announcement, they found the door to room 213 still, locked from the inside. The classroom was silent. No one responded to knocks, no voices answered the officers' calls. They were forced to break in. What they found inside made one of the officers step back and radio for backup immediately. The students were all alive, but they were pale, wide-eyed, and huddled in the farthest corner of the room, as though still hiding from something. The teacher was frozen in place, standing in front of them, staring blankly at the door, lips slightly parted as if mid-sentence. No one spoke at first. Just stunned silence. But what drew their attention wasn't just the terrified group, it was the classroom itself. One of the ceiling tiles above the teacher's desk had been pushed out of place, hanging askew. The crawl space above was exposed. The maintenance staff insisted that area led to nothing but dusty ductwork, no space for a person to move. Yet the edges of the tile were smeared with what looked like long, red streaks handprints dragged across the surface. They weren't fresh, but they hadn't been there earlier in the day. On the chalkboard behind the teacher's desk, there were similar marks, 3 long dark lines drawn from top to bottom, spaced as if made by claws or bloodied fingers. There was no sign of forced entry, no footprints, no fingerprints, nothing on camera. Every security feed had gone black moments after the lockdown was announced. Phones remained without signal. The timestamp on the intercom logs was erased. No voice matched in the system records. And yet something had moved through that room, something that left behind marks that couldn't be explained or cleaned away easily. After the incident, room 213 was officially closed off. Students were reassigned, desks removed, and the door sealed shut with a metal latch from the outside. Rumors spread like wildfire, each version more twisted than the last, but one thing stayed the same: no one wanted to go near that room. Even in broad daylight, the hallway outside felt colder than the rest of the school. Teachers avoided subbing in nearby rooms, and the janitorial staff began refusing night shifts that involved the second floor. But the noises didn't stop. Late into the evenings, when the school was supposed to be empty, the night janitors began hearing tapping. It always started the same way, 3 slow taps, spaced apart, coming from inside room 213. The first few times, they thought it was just pipes settling or wind through the vents. But then the tapping would move, sometimes on the walls, sometimes from the ceiling, sometimes echoing down the hall as if following them. One janitor quit on the spot after he heard a low whisper coming through the keyhole of the sealed door. A whisper that knew his name. Another claimed she saw something watching her through the narrow glass pane before it was boarded up, something tall and pale with eyes that didn't reflect light. Despite multiple requests to tear down the room or bring in specialists, the school board dismissed the concerns, citing budget issues and lack of evidence. But the maintenance logs told a different story: light bulbs constantly burning out near that hallway, water leaks that couldn't be traced, temperature drops that triggered false fire alarms. Students began placing their hands on the walls outside room 213, claiming they felt faint vibrations, like something was moving on the other side, something that hadn't left and wasn't going to.